right, everybody. Good evening. Hi. At this time, on behalf of the Monona Grove Board of Education, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Do we have our declaration of public notice?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Is there any recommendation for revision to our order of business tonight, or shall we go with the agenda as it stands?
Looks great.
Okay, we'll proceed then with the agenda as it is. Any public appearances tonight? I see none before us. That takes us to our consent agenda with two items: approval for the October 11th school board meeting minutes and approval of vouchers payable. Shall we make a motion on that with
I move
items?
approval of the consent agenda is presented.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right, the consent agenda has been approved. That takes us to recognitions. Do we have any recognitions tonight?
Paul has a whole bunch, right?
Yeah, sure. We have a lot of activity at the high school, so Dr. Roth, if you'd like to present yours, please.
The Golf Coaches Association recognizes academics after their season every year for the, this is just the women's season concluded, so we have Taylor Knutson, who was recognized as Academic All-State Honoree, and for that they have to have a cumulative GPA above 3.25, participate in 75% of their team's varsity matches, and be at least a sophomore. So we have a couple of our golfers every year that are recognized by them, so we appreciate that. Again, that's Taylor Knutson for the golf. Recognition for Will Waite is a marketing teacher in second year with us, and this fall we learned that he was recognized by the Wisconsin Marketing Education Association as the new teacher of the year by his state association, which is outstanding. We're excited to have Will on board. He's taking care of our DECA, our school store, and just his second year, and he's doing a super job. Some other athletics, number 2 tennis doubles team of Sarah Paulson and Jewel Lindwall participated in the state tennis tournament and got past their first round before losing in the second. Our number 1 tennis doubles team of Amanda Newman and Haley Munns won all 5 matches at state and were state champions, which is a first for us, and very exciting. They did a wonderful job, and as always handled themselves with class. So congratulations to Coach Willauer and Coach Ping for all their work with the kids. So that was just an outstanding year for them, and they were conference champs as well.
Dr. Brost, are they graduating? Those two, Amanda and Haley?
I should know this. One is a senior.
Okay.
I think Amanda's a senior and Haley's not. But
Hoping they might be coming back next year. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So, thinking like a coach that would plan for next year like that.
Right.
And we had a golfer make it to state as well and compete in the state golf meet, and that was Clarissa Riley Dye. So congratulations to her for advancing and getting participating in that. Boys cross country and girls cross country just ran at sectionals last weekend in Beloit. Peyton Nelson qualified from the girls team and is running at state in Wisconsin Rapids this Saturday. And the boys team won sectionals, and so the whole team will be, they take the top 2, will be participating in Wisconsin Rapids on Saturday as a team. They did that last year as well. So it's very exciting. The team consists of Caden Nelson, Gage Hunter, Alex Krause, Eddie Ganuich, James Giptos, Reed Anderson, and Charlie Ellenbecker. Those are the 7 that will compete for the boys, and Charlie Ellenbecker won sectional, so he was in first place. So again, we're wrapping up. Boys football continues for round level 2 tomorrow night at home, and conference girls swim is Saturday. We're hosting that meet, and soccer plays at Oregon tomorrow night in sectionals. So they're still going. So really, it's only one measure of success, but in terms of wins and losses and postseason play, the kids have had a really, really outstanding year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other recognitions? Computer share. All right, that takes us then to correspondence and announcements. All right, that moves us then to our administrative reports and our superintendent, Dan Olson.
Okay, so I have two items. The first is just, I attached some documents from our WASDA Fall Regional Conference, and a number of the legal updates you've probably seen through WSB information as well. So I don't know if there's anything new there, but just a, maybe a different perspective of, from those attorneys. So again, we're sorting through the budget bill with all the non-budgetary items that were added through, and of course DPI is in the process of putting together rules and so on for a number of those about how they'll exactly implement or impact our schools. So nothing new really to report that we weren't aware of already with that. Then the second thing, the Facilities Advisory Committee met their second meeting last night. Thank you, a couple of three of our board members able to attend. So I attached just today the two documents that were presented last night, the slides that were presented, and actually the second document wasn't presented last night, but it was the actual final report from Vanderwall on the enrollment study, which was done last March, the updated one. You had received, as board members, a presentation, but I don't think you actually got the actual written report that shows all the methodology and so on. So I attached that as well, also forwarded that on to their committee members today. And then at our next board meeting on November 8th, we will have two of our committee members here to present to the board a summary of the first two meetings, and then an opportunity for that interaction with the board to provide communication and feedback, back and forth with that.
Dan, for those of us who weren't able to be at the meeting, what did the population enrollment projections, how did they vary or differ
Sure.
from what they were before?
Yep, so the last projections that the board had seen were last spring, and with that, they were updated with our actual September enrollment for this fall. And so they did not actually go through, it was close enough to the projection that didn't go through the methodology of changing, the next couple of years with that. But if we recall, basically the summary was that we had seen the change from the original study 2 years ago to now. The original study had shown that the Monona student population was likely to remain steady, where in fact we've actually seen some growth, and so the new updated study has reflected that growth. And then of course we've seen consistently the projected growth, and it's and it has continued to be actual growth in our Cottage Grove schools. So I think it was, for our committee last night, there's a lot of information and data for them, to consume. The idea last night was more information presentation, a little bit of discussion about it, and obviously they'll have an opportunity then to digest that and come back to the next meeting and talk, more in depth, about that data.
I'm not sure who.
I was
Okay.
just gonna ask
Okay.
yes to, in that, is that posted on the website now, on your website? It
will be. I'm not sure if we got it up today yet, but it'll
But
be
you
here.
might just tell the board that you're posting all of that information on the website, so if you wanna see it, then
Yep.
you could ask.
Yeah,
questions
so
about that.
thank you for that clarification. So we honestly want to make sure all this information that is shared is available to the board and committee members, but also publicly. So we really will, for our committee members, we'll continue, of course, to email them the documents, but we have set up a web page specifically for the work of the facilities committee that will have all those documents that are accessible for the board member, our committee members there, as well as the public. And then for board members who are used to going to board docs to find materials, we'll also make sure we post them there. We found our committee members for some of them, it's a lot easier to just go to the website than navigate board docs, but at least that way we have a historical place, which documents were presented at which meeting, and so sometimes they'll be added after the fact, but we'll make sure at least they're uploaded so there's kind of a historical record of that as well.
I was just gonna say that they had a small group time at the end for those couple, only two of you probably weren't there, because Jen was there, because they're out
Oh, yeah,
before.
I'm sorry,
That's
yeah.
okay.
So they they came up with questions based on the presentations, and all three groups came up with some similar ones, and I think the plan is to address some of those next time. And
Yes.
build on them, and it was a very impressive process, and I think it's a good group, and raising, the questions are good ones, and they're ones I think we can answer, and so it was good to hear that, so.
All those documents will be available for public?
Yes. Yeah. And, to Susan's point, if I recall, the 4 things that we asked are in the group discussion to consider are: what were your major takeaways? What questions do you still have? What sorts of things do we need to make sure we communicate with the public? And what questions or information exchange might you have with our school board members? So, yeah, I as well, we were worried about that, we're really trying to stick to our 2-hour time frame, and it was a lot of information, so we're even updating our slides right up to the last minute, late in the afternoon, really trying to be conscious of time to get the right amount of information and within that 2-hour slot. So I think it went, pretty well.
Do I have this right? Again, it's not voting yet, but the long-range growth study is actually, it's the one that's the 59, it's posted on board docs
Correct.
for tonight's meeting even.
Yes.
So you could, it's there.
Oh, yeah, for tonight's board, I put that on this afternoon.
Yes. Anything else for our superintendent? Okay, thank you. That would take us to our board reports, and I see that the awesomely long committee meeting, the Community Engagement, Communication and Government Relations Committee, chaired by Carrie Robbins. Thank you, Carrie.
So, yeah, and we met on October 17th. I'm at a point now where I'm happy to take additional questions. So, Dean, Peter, if you have additional questions after this, let me know. I know there were several board members in attendance at this particular meeting, so some of you already know this. So, I'm going to frame my comments more broadly, and if you want more details, just let me know. The committee has now kicked off a process where we have 3 small work groups. Each of the work groups has been designed to accommodate the interests of the people that we matched with particular topics. So we see the next 3 meetings allowing time for those groups to move forward and thinking about the particular charge. Very broadly, the 3 topics are around improving the relationship between the school district and the minority community. That's one group. Second group is an assessment of school and community groups in both Cottage Grove and Monona. So sort of a survey approach of what exists now. And third is resource mapping, in particular to see what needs are unmet, what's the district already have as resources, and what would be some gaps. So each of the small subgroups is being corralled a little bit. We have Dan doing a group, Susan Fox doing a group, and me with a group. I'm expecting over the next few weeks that process will be fairly productive, because the first meeting already, I think under the leadership of the people that you have here, we already are starting to frame these topics a little more intentionally, and our hope is to bring back to this board by the end of the semester, like we've put it to the work groups by the end of November, early December, to be able to come back with either suggestions, recommendations, or requests for additional input on the direction that we're headed. The topics that we picked were based on the interests of the committee, but of course they all fall within the charge that this board initially identified. So I could say a lot more, but I sort of feel like the best update for right now is to let you know that there's work happening, and that you'll be updated shortly with either a recommendation or a request for direction. And then the other thing to talk about from that most recent committee meeting, we spent about 35 minutes in that meeting reflecting on the annual meeting of the school district. And I think a great use of the Community Engagement Committee is to tap into the perspectives and ideas from people who, as citizens, have chosen to be on that group. So it's useful to us, I hope useful to Dan, to hear some of their suggestions of what they thought would be good to continue, what they might recommend that we do differently, and just general suggestions that they had, and questions. So I think that was kind of immediately relevant. So we got something done at the meeting, and then we set the stage for additional things to happen later. I guess I'm going to defer to Susan and Dan if there's anything you think I should add.
No, I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think
Yeah, and
I don't wanna
think
relive
that's
the whole
fine.
meeting.
Yeah.
But that gives you a good sense of where we're headed. Okay.
Good.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. That takes us then to our report on the Personnel Committee and Dean Bowles.
I'll make it brief. We had a meeting that went probably for a couple hours, didn't it?
Mhm.
And basically, we were discussing the teacher proposal that was asked, I think we basically spent most of the time on one topic.
Yep.
And that was basically asking for years of service categories in category 3 of the teacher compensation plan. And it never got down to specifics, but it was a lot of as listeners, is a useful exchange on some of the values that they hold and the importance of I think longevity, loyalty, what they've learned, and commitment, that sort of thing. And we expect to go back and discuss with them next time. Hopefully, Dan said that you'll have some kind of proposals, and I think we meet tomorrow
Yes.
to discuss some of the next direction. Yeah, yes.
More specifically, wasn't the focus for tenure to be looked at every 10 years? Wasn't that the 10-year bump? Wasn't that the focus?
No,
That was the original request, right?
To establish minimum salaries at certain benchmark years, for example, 10 years, 15. And so,
But
yes.
it was
The
much.
request did say 10 and 15, right? Or
Yeah, actually, the proposal from our teachers were continually every 5 years, 10, 15, 20,
Okay.
25.
5
Yeah.
years? Okay.
It was much, there were some expressions of whether that should be 10 years or 15 or 5 or that sort of thing, I think it was mostly focused around value of experience, value of loyalty to the district, particularly as teachers find a comparison between their salaries and the people we have to hire in from the outside, that there's gaps there, and they feel that building in some benchmarks these experience, and I think particularly it was Monona Grove experience that they talked about as much as they did overall.
Anything else for Dean? All right, thank you. That then takes us to our possible action items section of our agenda. And the first item regards our 2018 annual meeting and budget hearing. And currently before us, we have a recommended date of October 3rd of 2018. And of course, that's on your agenda in more detail. Yes, Susan.
I would move approval of the 2018 annual meeting to be held on Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018 at 7 p.m. in the district office. Great.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Would we like discussion?
I just had a point of question when I see
Sure.
that the option is offered to us of location. And just wondered, Dan, if you had reaction after hearing what our committee had to say about the annual meeting and the space, and,
Mhm.
and kind of if you think Glacial Drumlin gives us the flexibility if there is an unexpectedly large turnout to immediately shift to a larger space that could accommodate it. Because I personally thought that worked great.
Mhm.
We'd planned in the IMC and then, pivot, let's have it in the gym. And this space, of course, wouldn't handle an overflow. And October 2018 might feel a little bit different climate-wise, and we just want to prepare for that time. And I sort of liked Glacial Drumlin, and I live a block away, so it's super convenient. So I mean, I just be, full
Mhm.
disclosure. So I'm open to either location, but I did think it worked well at Glacial Drumlin.
What we try and do is vary the sites so that we're in all the districts. And the only sites that wouldn't be as amenable to having a large gym, might be Taylor Prairie, but all the other sites would work.
Is it okay if Dan answers my question about why the administration gave the option of either the office or Glacial Drumlin? I was just curious why you set it up that way.
Yeah. I mean, historically, I know there's been in a number of different locations, you know, because there wasn't always necessarily a good space at the district office, so I think it'd been in the auditorium, you know, oftentimes, and then various gyms. I think for a short time, maybe 2-year period, we appeared to have kind of settled on the district office, and then if I recall, last time meeting, the board thought it'd be prudent to rotate and have a meeting in, you know, the Village of Cottage Grove. So in reflecting, the reason I put that in there is just so you know you had an option. I probably should have said you can pick any building you'd like.
Because we have to set the date tonight, but could we leave the location open, or do we have to also choose the location?
Well, you have to
tonight?
choose all those things sometime. You don't have to do any of them tonight, but, you know, what was approved at the annual meeting was to delegate to this board to determine those things. So when you do it, I guess it just has to be early enough so that when we do our notice, you know, next fall. So just real quickly, certainly convenience for setting up and so on, district office is great. There's a little bit more capacity here than there would be in the libraries in the buildings. But if there were a very large crowd, sure, that might be an issue. And so that would be another consideration, is to use a gym or the auditorium. You know, the challenge is, well, what if you have a small crowd of 15, 20 people and you're in the auditorium? Is that really the best venue? And, you know, probably not.
Well, that's why I went ahead and made the motion to have it here, because I thought it made sense to flip it back here. I think my preference would be to approve the time and place tonight. But if we have a feel over the summer that, or early fall, that there might be a reason that there'd be a larger crowd, we could certainly revisit the
Sure.
place and change it before anything ever went out. But it just makes sense to me to have it all done at this point and then change it if need be. I think it's, I guess I off the top of my head, the high school auditorium was never real great for it. It seems to me if we're gonna do it in both communities, then Glacial Drumlin here might be the best. I don't see any point in going to different buildings, unless it's a space need, and we can discuss that next summer if we feel like we need to have a larger space, and there's a strong feeling that it should be in a school in Monona instead, because we had it in Cottage Grove, then we can talk about that at the time. But to me, it makes sense to just, that's why I made the motion. Start with this.
The only other thing I would add for others who didn't hear the conversation is when we asked the community members on our community relations committee, what should we keep doing, the first thing they said was the location was good. So I just sort of mentioned, we asked people what they think, and that was what they said, so.
Most of them had not been at the previous one.
Right, so there was nothing wrong with,
Right,
there was nothing wrong with
that.
having a Glacial Drumlin, there was no complaint about that or anything like that, so. If you think it could be changed later, that's a way to go.
Yeah, I agree completely with what Susan said. If there's something that's going to be on the agenda, if we have any anticipation at all that it'd be a larger crowd, we can easily at a board meeting at that time take action to change it.
We did have one person who said that the sign outside of on keeping or changing the feedback from the committee, something to change was it said the sign outside the high school said that the meeting was at the district office. So I want to mention that when you flip a meeting location, there will be people who will go to the wrong place, and that means flip a meeting location year to year even, that people didn't know where to go. So as a marketing person, I would tell you my preference is not to decide or publish a location with the intention of possibly changing it. I would more advise to be silent on the location tonight if we think that we need time to determine where the best location will be to suit the event. Because once we're out saying it's at a particular place, you'll just have to rein that back in from people who say, but I had this thing in my calendar that said it was going to be at that place. So.
I guess I don't really see that as an issue because this board decided a year ago that it would be at Glacial Drumlin and the sign was still wrong. So that had nothing to do with it. So I just don't see that as an issue. So anyway, that's what you said, so we're ready to vote.
Are we gonna get back to the bottom of the sign gate?
Well, I mean, I just mention it because those are things that you would think about if you were asked as a board member to be thoughtful about making this decision, and who cares?
Any other comments or questions? All right, I believe we have a motion and a second, so we can take our vote. All those in favor of the Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018 meeting date, and yes, we're keeping the district office as our current location, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
I'm kidding.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hi, Boardman. Boardman Simpson, good to have you in the house. I believe that motion carried. Thank you.
I'm only gonna abstain because I'm ambivalent on setting the location tonight.
Thank you. All right, that takes us to our 2017-2018 budget.
All right, so we have this item, and then the following item is actually studying the tax levy. So I will be talking through pretty much both of them at the same time, but highlight when we get to the tax levy after the budget approval. So the board originally approved the preliminary budget back in June. And that was based off of our preliminary staffing, preliminary enrollment. So now that we are 5 months into our fiscal year, our annual meeting has been done, our third Friday count has happened, and DPI, the state budget was finally signed, and we are finally able to report out all of our final numbers. From what was originally presented, we missed our budget by about $23,000, which I think is pretty good with all those moving parts. So obviously I had to, during the budgeting process, we walked through zero-based budgeting, but there's still some, obviously moving parts. And so the budget that was approved was $23,000 more than the budget that you will approve tonight on Fund 10. And how does that money come out of the budget? There are areas where we are pre-planning, so on staffing, if we have an individual that's leaving and we plan on bringing someone in, all those things average out. In addition to that, we always do put a little extra money into curriculum supplies or supplies for buildings as an opportunity. If we are able to have that, that's great. If not, that's an area that it can take out of. So this budget includes the second year of our $2.6 million referendum. With the state budgets, we are getting zero increase in our revenue limits per student, but we are getting an additional $200 per pupil aid. So that has been that trend that I talked about at the annual meeting budget hearing that the state has started moving to. So it does give us some additional money to be able to meet some of our required needs that are facing the district. Some of those expenditure is the staffing plan, where we approved 11.58 FTE new staff. So that's been incorporated into this budget. We have our health insurance rates that came in, and we are at that 7%. And we did make that switch last year, so we did see some significant savings there. We did have a lock-in guaranteed or a percentage cap, which we did meet that this year. And part of the reason that we did meet that is due to the fact that we were part of the ETF plan. We didn't have any medical trends or history that they could. So the health insurances, when they took us, had to really take it based off of what they anticipated. Now they have a full year of medical trends, and so we'll be able to look at those types of things. Not planning on making any changes to our health benefits, but just wanted to let everybody know that we have a 7% increase for health insurance premiums, a 0% increase on the dental side. We're very, very fortunate. This is, I think, the fourth year that we've seen a 0% increase on dental insurance. So I'm just going to walk through the packet that I put together. I'm not going to go line by line. So the first 2 pages is actually our general fund, Fund 10. You can see that as we enter into the fiscal year, we have a fund balance of $8,136,000. That is not cash that's sitting in the account. That includes, obviously, fixed assets and other assets that are tied up. Part of the reason that when we look at fund balance is it also is the way that we receive our funding from the state and property taxes. They do not come. We won't get our first payment until December. So not only are we 5 months into the fiscal year when we finally approve a budget, but we actually start receiving revenue 7 months into the fiscal year. So we do the cash flow borrowing, which we approved back in September, and we did $6 million, and that's what allows us to meet our payroll needs and our expenditure needs. So when we look through the first 2 pages here, like I said, these are Fund 10. We have a revenue, total revenues for Fund 10 at $40,639,000, which is just over a $1 million increase. And the reason there's a $1 million increase on that is because of our $200 increase that we're receiving, plus our revenue limits that I also attached to the board docs, and because we did see some increase in student growth. So, and then also there is some increase on open enrollment. We are not taking any additional open enrollment. So last year we actually had more open enrollment students in our district. This year we're less, but each year they do raise that dollar amounts. So last year we were, about $6,500, and now we're at about $7,000. And so you can see we're at $2,611,000 in revenue that comes in for open enrollments. Going back up to local sources, 210, that's our property taxes. You can see we're actually seeing a decrease in the amount that we're levying for property taxes. So we're looking at $21,328,000. And then based on the aid estimate that I had reported out as of July 1, we saw an increase in equalization aid, which that does not give us additional money in our budget. It just shifts the burden from property taxes. So we actually received, are going to receive $12,952,000, and that's on line 620 state aid general. So then we do have a balanced budget. So if you move on to the second page, halfway down, that starts our expenditures. And then it's broken down by instruction, support services, and then non-program transactions. And you can see that we are planning to spend $40,639,530, which matches our revenue for Fund 10. Then we'll go on to page 3, which is Special Education Funds. Special Education Fund, as I've mentioned before, is where all of our funds that are related to students with IEP. We receive approximately 26 cents per dollar that we spend on special education as aid back to the district the following year. So far from being 2/3 funding or full funding for special education. So the money that we do not receive from aid actually is transferred out of the general fund over. We cannot have a fund balance in here, so we are anticipating spending on actually the 4th page. You can see our special education budget is $6,465,000. And that's broken down in the same concept as general fund, with instruction, support staff, and support services, and non-program transactions. And then the remaining parts of it are, I don't want to say the smaller side of the budgets, but they're the more specific ones where it's very specific what goes in there. So Fund 21, 23, and 29 are special project funds, and that's where our gifts and grants go and individuals donate to the district. And that's truly based pretty much off of history. We budget there for the purposes of trying to allocate all the money that's in there and then anticipate what could come in. So we currently have a fund balance of $73,971 on Fund 21. Debt service, Fund 38 and Fund 39. As a reminder, Fund 39 is referendum approved. Fund 38 is non-referendum, and we have a expenditure of $5,571,000 on debt service. Capital project funds, Fund 41, 46, 48, and 49. Those are actually funds that were part of previous referendums. We will plan on using some of that to apply to some of our capital projects to close those accounts out. A lot of times what happens is all those accounts have been closed out, there's been money sitting there and interest continues, and once we get to a certain point we can apply that to, but it has to be in the buildings and where those referendums happen, so that would be at GDS, and when we'll be able to apply some of that money. Food service, school nutrition, obviously that is a self-contained program, and for over the last 6 years it has been 100% self-contained. It has not been supported by the general fund, which is great news, and so we anticipate a budget there of $1,347,828. We are planning on a spending the exact amount that we receive in revenues. However, over the past number of years, we have actually collected more revenues than we have in expenditures. Part of it is that the federal food program requires us to set prices, and we do have a great staff that work very hard, but you can see there is a fund balance there that we are able to take some of that money and start upgrading our equipment and being able to offer some more things. So, unfortunately, we can't apply it to lower our lunch prices per federal regulations, which would be nice to be able to reverse that. Fund 80 is our community service fund, and this is where we are funding our aquatics programs for swim lessons, and we also our 2 SRO officers and our community media programs, and then we also have a few extracurricular activities that our athletic department is able to put on during the summer for summer camps, which is open to everybody. So that's why it's in Fund 80. And then Fund 99 is we are the fiscal agent for Dane County School to Work, which is we actually receive some additional revenue for doing that service, and they also rent our office space over in Nichols. So there is no negative fiscal impact to the district, but we do report that out because we are required to report that to DPI, and then obviously accounting as a fiscal agent to other schools that participates. So then moving on to the bottom 2 charts here, the property tax levy. Tonight, at the next item that we'll be approving, we're looking at a total school tax levy of $28,049,331. But really what most people think of is that mill rates, and tonight's mill rate is actually $13.35 per $1,000 of property value, which is actually below what prior to 2014-15 was, and prior to what our referendum was. So the district is very happy to be able to report that unless people's property assessments are increasing, if their property assessments stay the same, they should see actually a decrease in the school portion of property taxes. So is there any questions on the specific budget?
I'll come back to my usual question this time of year. We made some promises on the referendum of the various categories we had, and that I know they weren't promises to the dollar, but those categories, and you've had periodic reports on how we've kept faith with the promise, with our needs then, and could that possibly be brought up to date as of this last school year?
Sure.
And how we do that, because I think that's the kind of report that I think gives public confidence in our fiscal condition.
And going one step farther, it would, now that this is our second year into it, being able to put those reports side by side and showing in sort of an ongoing to continue to support.
Yeah, if there's some differences, then we can explain them and that sort of thing.
Other questions or discussion?
I think half of the food service fund came from me.
Keep it up then, John.
We
Oh, my
appreciate
son.
it. Thank you very much.
Yes, my son, every other day, those food service accounts.
A la carte, right?
Yes. Like, just go to the Express and be cheaper.
Nice. So at this time, are we ready for a motion for the budget? Thumbs up, all right, thank you.
Sure. I can move approval of the 2017-18 budget as presented.
Thank you. A second, please.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Dean. All those in favor?
Discussion.
Oh, sorry, more discussion. Apologies. Further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Thank you. The motion carries and the budget has been approved. Which takes us to the tax levy.
Yeah, so I won't go into that any more detail, but in board docs, we are proposing a total tax levy of $1,331, which represents a mill rate of $13.35. At the budget hearing, we did propose a mill rate of $13.36, so that's still a decrease from that. In 2016-17, we were at $13.89. And then you can see how that mill rate breaks out for Fund 10, Fund 38, Fund 39, and Fund 50.
Susan?
I move approval of the 2017-18 tax levy as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. All right. That motion carries and our tax levy has been approved. Thank you for those items. The last item in our possible action section, pardon me, is the extracurricular and additive schedule, and we have a revision being proposed.
Okay, so again, if you recall, we just made a revision last meeting, and this is a very good problem to have, that we have more and more kids participating. So as we had students sign up for jazz band, again, the numbers have increased significantly, and so the recommendation, Dr. Brost working with our music teachers, is to add an additional section of jazz band, which would be a jazz band 3. That way all students can participate, no one has to be turned away. And so in looking at our additive schedule, where we are recommending placement, you'll see, I think, is consistent with, actually we're recommending the same compensation as jazz band 2. So it'll just be another section basically of the same piece. So if you have any specific questions about it, certainly Dr. Browse could answer those for you. But
Thank you for that.
I just have one question. When there's a change like this, is it strictly based on the number of students enrolled in a activity exceeding what we previously thought when these levels were set?
yes. Yeah. And so just to clarify, in the future, if there weren't enough students to justify 3 sections, we wouldn't have to take it off the schedule. We just wouldn't fill that
No,
position.
I was curious.
Yeah.
I was curious about if it went the other way. Then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so we do have a number of these positions on here, or a handful, not many, but that just aren't filled because, there's not a need.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Then, at this time, we need a motion to approve the current revision to the extracurricular and additive schedule. Dean?
Also move the added
Thank you.
the added compensation and position for jazz.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. All right, this motion carries. And we have another additive, which is an awesome problem, as you said. Paul, could they play for a meeting at some point? That'd like totally change the whole, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fantastic. All right, that takes us to the discussion section, and we have legislative advocacy items on our agenda.
Yeah, I'll begin with a brief introduction about why we put this on. So certainly, I've had numerous discussions with, Jennifer Smith as board president, as we set agendas about the idea when is it appropriate to use resolutions. I've also had discussions with Susan Fox as our legislative liaison, as well as a number of other board members. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to put it as a discussion item to let's, revisit this idea and see if we can have some consensus about how we conduct as a board our legislative advocacy, and resolutions are actually only one piece of of advocacy, as you know. And so I just put a copy of the last 2 resolutions that the board actually has approved, and I've been giving this a little bit of thought as well about, okay, what are the types of things that are appropriate for resolutions versus direct correspondence and communication with our legislators versus actually appearing at the Capitol for, hearings. And those are all three things that we have, this board has been very good about, participating in those. And so, if you don't mind, start with just kind of my personal thought about how we do those things. The resolutions, I think both of the last two were on items that weren't just single issue items that happened to come up in this legislative session. There certainly is some legislation about the guns, but if you recall, as Susan introduced that, it was more of a general statement about general legislation about guns in schools, and which I think was good. So it's not specifically addressed at a specific piece of legislation. Likewise, with the back to the school start date, that's a very specific item, but there's something not likely to be adopted by our current legislature, but is something that, one of those that we believe we want to keep at the forefront in year after year, and those are the type of things that at some point when the condition might be right, that it might finally be approved. And so to go on record as a board supporting that, I think is important. So it seems to me that those are the appropriate type things for resolutions, kind of those big idea things or specific items. Whereas if there's specific legislation that we're very concerned about, or that we'd like to see approval of, either way, I think the more appropriate method is that direct correspondence and communication with our legislators and appearing at legislative hearings. And so that's kind of my thoughts about the process to kick it off.
Susan?
Well, I guess I'm a little confused about that, because normally when we do a resolution, we do both. So, when it feels like a powerful moment where we as a board want to make a statement, then it seems appropriate to make a resolution. And Susan brings forward the legislation and then offers us whether or not we want to do a resolution. And then if it feels like the guns on school grounds, that was something we as a board felt we wanted to do. It seems to be kind of a specific item-driven effect. Susan reports out, I guess a couple things I'd like to suggest is, one, that we have a legislative report out every month if she feels that's appropriate, because we've delegated that to her. And then if she feels like there isn't anything new or important, then we don't get that. But I think we should agendize that if you're, that should be your direction.
If the board feels that way.
Right. I think that's helpful to us, particularly, there are going to be slow times and fast times. And she may say, I need to come twice this month. And then I think we should respond as a board when we feel it's appropriate to respond. And we support that. That's why we vote on the resolutions. So,
Thank you, Susan.
I'd certainly be willing to do that if the board wants to do that. Everybody gets those WSB updates, I think, so you all read them. So I don't know if my coming and repeating them is worthwhile or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The thing about the resolutions is that it's hard to do those in a timely way sometimes. For example, some bills, possibly the gun one, will be going before possibly Monday. Next week is the floor session again. So it's not on the agenda tonight to approve, so it can't be approved. Now what we could do, the resolution that we approved on guns certainly relates to the bill that is coming up. They didn't pay attention to any of it, but that went to the two committees who dealt with it and our legislators. So it would be possible to send it to all of them. I don't know if they have a mass email on how hard that is to send it to all of them, so they all have it. That's a thought. We don't know for sure that it's coming up, but that's always an issue, is sometimes we'll get, and that because I have been designated as legislative liaison, but I think anybody that goes to the legislative conference in November, you can sign up and you'll get alerts. In other words, when WSB is asking us to act quickly, I'll get an alert, which I'm not sure everybody gets. And then typically what I've done is either gone down to the hearing, and if I feel comfortable speaking based on our previous discussions, I'll do that. I'll sometimes send an email to, I don't know that we always need a resolution. I think that's what Dan was saying. We don't usually send a letter and a resolution. When we pass a resolution, we just send it. So to me, sometimes it's easier just to write a letter, to make it very short, brief, because they do, you know, the question comes up of how valuable is it, and we do hear from Dan Rossmiller and Chris Kulo, that the two legislative liaisons with WSB, that they appreciate when boards contact legislators simply because when they're in their offices, sometimes they'll say, well, we didn't hear from anybody on this, so what's the problem? So they kind of like that support, and even our legislators who generally are currently in agreement with most of our opinions, they also like to hear so they can show that they're getting support from districts. So there's some benefit to sending them in. I'm just never sure what the best way to do it is. I don't know that it always has to be a resolution. To me, they're sort of artificial and contrived, and I'm pretty sure the legislators don't really read them. I think they probably don't get past the first piece, and that's where I think sometimes just a letter is better. I mean, it could still be signed by everybody, but that's my 2 cents. You know, I had raised this with Jennifer and Dan, not this particular topic, but there's a bill being kicked around in Jeremy Thiesfeld's committee that would, among other things, give teachers the right to send kids out of their classroom for a period of up to 2 days. Now, it's now on its 10th iteration. It has not been formalized as a bill. It's not being circulated for signatures yet. So it's not going to come up in this floor session, but it could come up later this year, because they're still working on it. And I talked to Dan Rossmiller a little bit about it the other day we were at the school law convention or conference, whatever, seminar. And he said it isn't even really clear what that means. In other words, they would be able to supersede administration, because they could simply pull a kid out of their class, and it's not really clear what. Then they use the term suspension in the bill. That's what caught my eye. I thought, what, you're saying a teacher can suspend a kid? And it's not really clear what they mean by that, whether they would just be out of their class or whether they are in fact talking about they can send them out. And it's hard to tell where this came from. There's some thought there was one incident with a teacher in his district, and then the pro-voucher people.
A lady in Green Bay wrote
Right.
a letter to the editor that she resigned because she didn't feel safe in her classroom.
Yeah, that's what it
where this
was.
bill
With
came
somebody,
from.
a student.
And I would
threw
guess
something
that
at
he
her or
doesn't know
something.
98% of what he wants in this bill.
Well, the other factor that's raised is the pro-voucher folks are always trying to get, you know, I mean, they put out literature that talks about climate in public schools, and he may be getting pressure from that group as well. So I'm not sure entirely where it's coming from. I have no idea how the other legislators would feel about it. It certainly would fly in the face of the board's role in setting policy, our administrator's role, our efforts towards restorative practices and PBIS, and it doesn't make sense based on what we're doing. So, but I think it seems a little premature to come out with anything yet on that because we don't really know where it's going to go. It may just die on the vine. WSB is working with him. Paul,
Yeah, thank you.
Just a note on that, they just sent out something today, also did, that they're looking for a co-signature on that, and it might could get it in a hearing next week, so.
Oh, okay.
I've been asked
So it is coming up.
by ASA, if it goes to a hearing, to take a couple folks and maybe go address it, so.
That would be
isn't
great.
a particular thing, so there is a chance that it might still surface. They're trying to
Okay.
keep from getting another signature to back it out of committee.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I hadn't heard that yet, and I haven't gotten that alert from Dan Rossmore yet. I'll probably come in, but yeah, I'll be back in town Monday, so if there is a hearing next week, something that might be Tuesday. Tuesdays are common. I'll look at it. I'd be willing to show up at that too, and that's when I feel comfortable speaking on because we don't know what the bill looks like yet, so it's hard to frame anything. I mean, that sometimes is the problem. You don't know till the day before.
Thank you. Dean?
I think often these things should be acted on in a quick fashion and so forth. So I think that if Susan knows that items are coming up in the future and has some question about whether the board would do that, I would simply bring it to the board and we're yay or nay on it or that sort of thing. And I'd leave it up to Susan, the board president, Dan, whatever combination you want to, of whether you pursue that hard or easy and in what form, because I think that bring it to a formal board on every action, where often the timeliness of it is more important than what you say, and the vehicle of how you say it is more important than what you say often too. So I would just, I don't know if you want to frame that into some kind of a policy, but I really think that, I think the only thing that we need to know as a board, as Susan knows it, is these things are coming up, and what do you think if there's some question about it? I think it's more of having some flexibility to act in whatever might be the most immediate and appropriate thing to do.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think I used to think that, you know, the budget's obviously a huge period where because they throw all kinds of things in the budget, and this year they took a bunch out and they put them back in right at the end. But
Always.
stuff like this does come up and it's simmering, and see, this is a good example, because it was just a couple of days ago, I had this conversation with Dan Rossman, who didn't think it was anywhere near coming out of the committee yet. And now we're hearing that it is coming out, and they may be holding a hearing already. That's a pretty quick turnaround. So, yeah, you do have to be able to act quickly, obviously.
I think in conversation with Dan and conversations I've had with board members in other districts, I think there's a sense of the timeliness, the actually communicating directly with your legislators. That's
Right.
one piece of it. I also think there is a place for us as a board to determine topics. And I appreciate the distinction that you were making, Dan, between like those pieces that are actionable, where we want to be communicating in a very targeted and quick manner. And then I think there are maybe broader umbrellas, whether they're pedagogical or philosophical or social pieces that perhaps as a board we do want to have some discussion and make a resolution, not just for the legislative piece, but for the people in our communities and our families and our students and our staff. And so it may not cause something to happen or not happen, but it at least is our voice, an affirmation of the values and what we're trying to do as a district. And I do think that has a different effect, and I think it has perhaps a different value. They could act in companion, but I also think that serves us as a district in a different way, whether it's just publishing in, the HI or on our webpage. I do think from time to time topics come up that it's okay for us to have that discussion and perhaps generate a resolution. So different tools perhaps, and I think all of them have a value. Yeah. And so for me, Dean, I think the piece that happens often is Dan and I might have a conversation, and then we try to decide if that's worthy of board time or not. And so I appreciate your point too, that we don't need to micro,
No.
manage every single WASB
No,
update that we get.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So I would just reiterate, I think it's important for each of us as board members, if there are topics, whether they're in the news or through the WASB pieces and other sources, I do think it's important and helpful if you communicate that with Dan or myself or other board members, so that we don't get neglectful. Yeah.
I just add to that, what you said there kind of suggests that in some cases, one of the actions that you can take is write a letter to the editor or to get a news story out, because you might, that often, all of these people have clipping services, and that's much broader even than Susan walking into a legislative office sometimes, or depends on the issue and the item and the timeliness of it and that sort of thing. Some things you can nip in the bud through that type of thing, and it's the oh my gosh, it's they're doing that in schools again, or something.
Well, the Teacher Protection Act, which is what this one's being called, was an example of that, because it jumped out at me when I got it, and I immediately emailed it to you and said, should we talk about this? And then, it is what it is. But so I think everybody should feel comfortable if there's one, and I know Jennifer has thought about whether we want to do another resolution on the guns. I'm not sure whether, I certainly wouldn't have time to do that by next week, but I think given that we did one, if we wanted to send this again, that that's a possibility. But I think, we've kind of said pretty much what there is to say on that. And I think that resolution was published in the Herald, wasn't it? I think, I'm not sure. One of them was, I think.
I believe
I
so.
think that one was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Jeff?
So I'm of the opinion it's more important to inform the people than to talk to the legislators, because I really don't think the legislators care what we have to say, for the most part, especially the ones that you need to sway. So I think it's important to keep up and let people know that this stuff is happening, because I think a lot of people don't pay attention to what's happening, I mean, especially as it relates to the schools.
That doesn't prevent you from doing all the above though either.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I think if we spend a lot of time to send something to the legislature, I think that's just time completely wasted. But when we send it to the Herald and do stuff like that, I think that stuff matters more. Because I think then that takes notice. And the only other way would be is if we started every letter to the legislators calling them terrorists, then they tend to pay attention to that lately if you watch the news. So it got Robin Voss's attention.
That's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it. Sure. All right, anything further? Yes.
I just wanted to appreciate that on the WASB website, which I didn't realize till the links, so thanks to links in board docs, that our resolutions that we passed within the last calendar year both show up on the WASB website under this tab of boards taking action, and it's kind of interesting to see which boards group together under which topics. So to your point, Jennifer, which I agree with, I think there is something about positioning the district and what are our values and where are we gonna align ourselves. And I don't mean to look at this list of 10 or 15 things and think we have to jump on the bandwagon on all these issues, but which are the ones that represent us. And so I think it's nice to see that we are in here where we are, and I'm noting the districts that have chosen different topics to stand for it. And so yes, I think it's worth the value of the resolution, although I think from a practical matter, Susan's point that a letter directly to the person, the legislator, or the office themselves might be the expedient way to address the issue at hand. There's a different longer-term strategy of being on record and being in these kinds of forums where it's, well, what is the Monona Grove value system on this? And we as a board have taken the time to have a resolution. So they are different purposes. I like the fact that we appear here. I feel like it makes us look good. There's 414 districts, and there's very few handful of them that are appearing to be thoughtful and participate in this kind of forum. So I feel good about us being there, and if there were other topics that people wanted to bring forward, I absolutely support that, and I'm appreciative that Susan's keeping a finger on the pulse of the action happening in the Capitol, in addition to this kind of opportunity for identifying topics that we think are worth our time, so that people coming to our district understand what we're about. I think it helps with all kinds of things, with recruitment and retention of staff, and just all kinds of other things that are worth the time to do this. And the other thing I want to mention is that I'm really appreciative of this happening. You guys will remember that the charge to the subcommittee that we have includes government relations, and it's just not practical to do within that kind of committee structure in a way that we're finding, at least this fall, with how that's set up. So it might be the case for this board in the future, looking at the charge to the different subcommittees, to revisit the charge to that committee and to think carefully about whether government relations, in the way that we're talking about these tasks of resolutions and appearing at hearings and organizing, I mean, that those kinds of things are a different type of work that needs to get done that may not lend itself to being embedded within that committee.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you have some thoughts about that too.
I have said that. I think most of the people that signed up, I would say all the people who signed up for that committee, did not sign up for that reason. They signed up for the communications
Yes,
part.
they did.
And it's very awkward to try to fit that in because they're not really up to speed on those things, and I don't know that that's their goal. I almost think if we really, I agree with you that that's something we should maybe revisit, and the idea would be to have a separate government relations committee, and then you have, because there are a lot of districts that have we used to have one years ago, and it had been disbanded before I got on the board, and they in fact took it out of the policy before I got on the board, but there are a lot of districts who have that and who have pretty active community groups who meet periodically to discuss what's going on and to try to help educate their community, and that would be more what I would see that kind of committee doing. In the government relations committee, that's not really ever going to be part of that group. I don't think.
It's just
It
not
just
who
doesn't
that
make
group
sense.
attracted and
Right.
what they want and where the energy went. And so I'm
Right.
really grateful that it
Right.
shifts back here to the full board for determining how to proceed.
So I saw Dean and Susan.
Right,
So
with
Susan,
Susan.
okay, thank you.
I was just gonna say, I've gone and watched those committee meetings, and basically what Carrie has Susan do is just a wrap-up at the end of the meeting. And one of the goals from this board was to communicate better with the community. And I think that's been, and again, it's about 4 minutes, because Carrie's really good about keeping things on time track. But it does help those community members that you're training and teaching to outreach into the community about the things legislatively that are affecting our school district. And I think that piece is extremely valuable, because we have no other avenue to do that unless we want to put a weekly thing in the newspaper, which nobody's doing, you know? So I would continue to advocate, as the chair of that committee feels comfortable. I mean, there are gonna be, just as I said earlier, there are gonna be times there's gonna be no legislative update at all. It basically is a 3-minute wrap-up, and occasionally they're gonna be, it's the only avenue we have right now, until you invent another one, for us to get legislative information that impacts this district out to the community. So unless you give us another avenue, that's all we got.
Thank you. Dean?
Well, play off a little bit of that, when you had that Government Affairs and Relations Committee, I was on it at one time, and it was very difficult to act in a timely fashion on most of the things, or to have a committee with a number of citizens on it on what to do, because it ended up going back to the board to some extent, because they should we be doing this, because does the board know anything about it, and what would they say if they did know about it, and so forth. I found at that time the most valuable thing about it, to having some citizen members on it, was kind of informing the community themselves, and often that resulted in their own personal letters to the editor or something like that. But I wouldn't use that committee as the sounding board for legislative action, but more to inform it so that they can spread the word to the extent that they would want to do it.
All good thoughts. Yeah, thank you. Is it the case, I'm hearing from a few voices that, would you like a future agenda then to revisit the charge of our community engagement committee, or shall we let that stand for the rest of the year and then reconsider, or think about it? Are we in that place of just,
We wait till next year.
Yeah,
Next year's committee.
probably let it stand.
I'm just
till-
clarifying.
I guess I can just speak to my initial reaction to that, but I would, Dan and Susan are there too. So my initial reaction to that is, we brought the people in, we told them to charge the committee. We can see where that goes this year, where we've only had a few meetings with them, so it could continue to evolve. However, early indications are such that it's not gonna be the focus of a lot of our energy this fall, due to the nature of the particular people who applied to serve and who are currently on it. But it makes sense to me to revisit at the time that this board is looking at committee appointments for 2018-19. And the additional question that I have about that is, and I've said this before, I'm really appreciative of Susan Fox being in that role of legislative liaison, and that's incredibly valuable. I think it rises to the level of when we do our board appointments and our committee chair appointments. And I don't remember exactly the process we used, if you just were like gracious enough to do it, or if we took a vote and appointed you to that particular role, or what. But I think it would be useful to have that legislative liaison person in place at the time that the other officer positions are determined, and the WASB liaison and whatever, all the new teacher, the MGEF liaison, all that stuff happens. Because then that person may decide if they need an ad hoc committee to wrestle up to work on a particular topic, or if the committee structure isn't helpful or nimble enough for the reasons that Dean said. So I think as long as the person is in place, then they can identify what structure or what resources would be necessary for success. But I don't think that we need to change midstream this year. I think I'd prefer to play it out a little bit, because no one's angry or restless right now, so I think it's okay how it is.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's
Okay,
better.
thank you. Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that very much. All right, anything else here Okay, that takes us then to reminders for future meetings. Our Personnel Committee meets tomorrow. Yay. November 7th is our Community Engagement Committee, and November 8th is our next school board meeting. And I think that's it. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Also moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Dean. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.